too bad. I mean, like, I got, like, hella COVID relief money. And so, like, I used that to move to Columbus, Ohio, which is just, like, generally, like, a cheaper place to live. And, like, in the process of that, like, I ended up, like, training, like, a kind of COVID bubble of, like, cartoonists and, like, cartoonist-adjacent people. So, like, it ended up being pretty nice. Like, I can't imagine having, like, a better setup as far as just, like, you know, doing things as safely as possible at the time and, like, you know, not starving. And eventually, like, I ended up working at a sort of, like, I don't know, just, like, a nice general sort of all-purpose kind of powerlifting, kind of CrossFit, kind of bodybuilding gym that's in downtown Columbus. And so, like, I do that and I teach just, like, occasionally, and, like, I do pretty fine for myself as far as, like, being able to support myself for the most part. So
obviously Columbus is a really vibrant cartooning community now, but it's wild that there are enough cartoonists that could really kind of keep you going, or that there were enough cartoonists interested in weight training that could keep you going for a bit.
Yeah, and now I've kind of, like, expanded to, like, you know, just, like, normal people that want to, like, train, like, where I've got plenty of people, like, the gym just refers me as far as just, like, I don't know, just regular folks that want to do, like, some form of weight training where I'm not, like, training them to be, like, bodybuilders or anything like that.
Columbus is cheaper than Pittsburgh?
Minneapolis is, like, where I was. And so, yeah, it is, because it's just, like, that much more of, like, a weird libertarian hell state. So
in the book, you were in Pittsburgh for some time.
For that little, like, residency that I did for, like, a week. So it's sort of like something I did in the summer after I graduated, and then I went back home.
It seemed like you were, like, maybe considering moving there at some point?
I think it was just, like, that kind of, like, post-grad thing where you just don't really know where you're going to be long-term. And, like, I'd never really thought I would leave Minneapolis, but I also wasn't, like, resigned to stay there. I don't know. I never really got to, like, move away after, like, high school or, like, during college. So it ended up being Columbus, like, once I was, like, effectively laid off because of COVID, I was like, I might as well just do this now. This is, like, the easiest it's going to be.
You were from Oklahoma originally and then went to school in Minneapolis?
My parents, like, moved up to Minnesota when I was, like, 4 or 5. So I was born in, like, basically where they filmed Twister, just, like, the shittiest part of Oklahoma, and then came up to Duluth, Minnesota, and went to school in Minneapolis.
You went to art school?
Yeah, in Minneapolis.
Was that a worthwhile experience?
I mean, I can complain about it all I want, but, like, ultimately, like, I feel like I'm in a good spot now, so it's sort of like any complaint anyone would have about college in America, where it's like, wow, this could have been way cheaper, and, you know, like, it would be a lot easier if I wasn't, like, dealing with all this debt after the fact. And I don't know, however exploitative and fucked up it is that we have, like, comics degrees where there's no, like, can't really point to really anyone that, like, is doing well enough to maybe say that that's a great idea to do. But at the same time, like, I really do enjoy my life now, and doing better than a lot of people who make that choice. So
just, like, run-of-the-mill late capitalism sorts of complaints?
Yeah, nothing particularly interesting.
I had Dan Klaus on the show. You know, I think the bulk of his money comes from selling originals and doing illustrations. It's you know, looking at somebody who's obviously, like, at the top of his game and has been for a long time, like, it's so difficult to make a living doing this.
Yeah, and I have, like, a really supportive partner, so I like, kind of make no bones about the fact that, like, if anyone's, like, looking at me being like, oh, she made it, I'm like, well, I've made, like, other strategic life choices, so it's not like I've got everything figured out.
The cartoonists I talk to who have been through the process of not only art school but studying comics, it seems to be it seems to have been trending in the right direction, you know, as far as, like, actual usable skills, but also, you know, how to kind of survive in life as an artist. I
mean, kind of. I feel like it's it really depends on the program. Like, I'm finding as I'm, like, going across the country and, like, visiting different comics programs, like, just how different everything can be. Just, like, with, like, the administration that the school, you know, there's the weird hoops they make you jump through to get your diploma or whatever. But, like, I don't know. Like, I also feel like the education that I got even, I don't know, like, not even, like, less than 10 years ago at this point is just so outdated, where it's, like, I was being told to, like, cold call people and, like, make business cards and, like, this shit that just, like, makes no sense to do now. And it was only kind of just, like, coming around to, like, the best ways to game out, like, algorithms and things like that. Like, it's always changing, so it's sort of like by the time that you graduate, like, and you would hope that you as, like, a younger person are kind of, like, glued into social media to an extent where it's not it's not horrible for, like, you as a person. It just, like, you just understand how to game it for the, you know, business that you have to run, essentially. But it's like, I don't know. I can't even imagine, like, how out of the loop I will be in 5 years as far as, like, what I'm supposed to be doing according to the, you know, academic text.
You feel like you've got a pretty good grasp on things like social media at this point, though?
I don't know. I kind of have always just, like, used it like a billboard as opposed to, like, a means to engage. You know, it's just like, this is the information of where I will physically be at this time. I'm not going live, you know, on Instagram or anything. So
it sounded like you went to school with some expectation of, like, kind of breaking into the superhero sides of things.
Well, I don't even know if I really knew what I wanted to do. It's just that I was, like, only ever really good at drawing, and, like, theoretically I would make comics, but I didn't really know, like, what I wanted to do with that, and I was not, like, talented enough to really go that route. But I don't know, it just kind of depends on, like, where your professors are sort of lying within the frame of employment. Like, Kevin Huizinga is sort of the professor I point to the most, where, I mean, like, he's the obvious answer being that he taught me, and, like, he, you know, makes books for Drawn and Quarterly, and it's more literary than it is, like, you know, being, like, an inker or a letterer or something, you know, that's part of, like, a known brand and an identity that's like a marketing scheme. But yeah, I mean, like most people, I think I went into school thinking I would do something, but not really having any idea, like, what that kind of life would be like, or, like, what that would actually entail. So
was Kevin a big part in nudging you in this direction?
I don't know if he was necessarily, like, a big part of nudging me in the direction. I think that, if anything, it would kind of, like, dissuade me from doing a lot of the things that he did, because he's definitely not the kind of person who's, like, hooting and hollering on the internet and, like, you know, trying to get eyes on the product or whatever. Like, he was always kind of, like, doing, like, a do as I say, not as I do, as far as, like, trying to tell us, like, ways to be smart about our work. But no, I mean, I would be going to small press shows because I wanted to table at them and sell my, like, zines and small mini comics and stuff, and he would just be there, and, like, that was not what I saw with, like, my other teachers. So
that's the thing about him is, you know, you mentioned the Drawn Quarterly stuff, but also he's been doing a lot of self-publishing over the years, which is probably an immensely useful gateway to get into this world.
Yeah, and something I still really like doing for the most part. So,
were they memoir? Were they autobiography from the beginning?
For the most part, I did a 24-hour comic about, like, a funny story from, like, my college years, and that was, like, one of the first things that people really actually seemed to connect with when I was, like, critiquing it in college, and then I started, like, selling it, and, like, it was a pretty easy sell for most people. So I think that, like, initial success, like, kind of was like, okay, like, I'm doing the right thing here. Like, this is the right direction to go in.
What was that story?
A story about trying to have sex at the Orlando International Airport with somebody I met in the security line. So
I don't want to do any spoilers, but it's been out for a while. How did that go?
it didn't happen, but we were both mutually enthused with each other. So who knows? Maybe I will someday reprint it.
What kind of work were you making prior to that?
I don't know. Like, I had, like, a bunch of, like, weird ideas for comics. I had, like, a comic about, like, a kid who had, like, the ability to, like, talk to dolphins. Or talk to this one dolphin. And, like, he was a lifeguard, and I was lifeguarding at the time. He lifeguarded outside, he met a dolphin, and the dolphin was basically, like, pushing him to become, like, an eco-terrorist. So there was, like, all these ideas I had for that, and then there was one, another nautical themed one, where it was, like, this little weird mutant fucking kid with, like, a shark head, where his, like, basically, like, his mom fucked Aquaman, but instead of getting, like, a really hot son, it just got, like, this fucking shitty little shark-headed boy.
He got, like, the worst parts of the mermaid.
Yeah, so it was sort of like that. I don't know. I had a couple, like, really random ones. There was a lot of just, like, school assignments where it was kind of like make a nonfiction comic, and rather than doing something from my life, I did like a kind of like I don't know, like nature documentary thing or something about animals. I don't know. It was always kind of predicated upon like turning something in that was like an inking assignment or something. It was never like particularly like, oh, come up with like a cool, 12-page story or something. It was like early beginnings of comics school.
It definitely helps to have a prompt.
Yeah. The
24-hour comic was done while you were still at school?
Yeah, I was like a sophomore or something. I don't remember.
So you graduate, it sounds like by the time you graduate, you've got a pretty good grasp on the kinds of comics you want to make. How does that process start?
Well, like being in art school, like you're dealing with like the opinions of like your teacher and then like dumb kids who are just as lost as you are. And so it's hard to parse and understand like any kind of like direction you're supposed to be taking with your work, because a lot of the times the teachers are not necessarily giving you advice that you're hearing. Like you only really hear like weird dumb quips about like particular panels or little weird choices that you make that have nothing to do with like your ideas or like your skill. So I don't know, like it's kind of just like you sit there for like 4 hours giving feedback to people that are like not very talented, and have bad ideas, have stupid like 19-year-old ideas about stories, about like most of it when I was in college, it was just like things that just fundamentally make no sense and are not clear and are just like very clearly like this person's 400-page saga in their mind, but then they've like shoehorned it into an assignment that like has nothing to do with what they want to do. And so it's just like a complete failure to like meet the criteria of the assignment and just like a waste of time. Now it's like kids want to make cute stories about friends who are nice to each other that have like no story at all. It's just like they just want to make like cutesy feel-good stories that are usually like, this person is non-binary and queer and they have a good friend. And I'm like, well, do they do anything? Like it's not, there's no conflict. There's nothing like going on at all. It's just like a cute style of drawing that they want to do. But yeah, like, I mean, me drawing like hyenas that die in a bushfire narrated by David Attenborough, and I put it in front of these other people and they're just like, I like how you did the fire.
Just in no way actually.
Yeah, so I mean, part of it being like, let me do something that's like wild for shock factor, because like more likely than not I'm like high during class and I don't give a fuck about what any of these people think. And be like, people are laughing at it and like actually reacting to it in some way. So I'm like, okay.
When you put it like that between the students and the a lot of the professors not giving you particularly useful feedback. What was the main thing you got out of it? Was just kind of forcing yourself to sit down and make this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, being accountable is a big part of it. I think just like, even if like the assignment or the feedback's bad, it's just sort of like going into your like 10,000 hours of drawing that you have to do to like be good at something. It's trying out stuff. It's meeting people that like, you know, I've gone on this tour and I've like met a handful of people that I've went to college with and like were, you know, part of my like freshman foundation year that like have nothing to do with what I do now, but are like still good friends. So it's just like the college experience, which is like invaluable, I would say. But yeah, I mean, like Kevin, I had multiple classes with him. There's plenty of things that like, you know, I talked to him about like off hours that were like not related to class that helped me. And, you know, just like in the way of like you show up and they're like, you know, there's like a zine fest this weekend. And you're like, no, I didn't know. I'm going to go now. Cool. So
the younger artists you're talking about who are making these stories about good friends being good friends with each other, are these students you're teaching?
Yeah, for the most part.
Do you give them advice? Do you attempt to kind of push them in the direction of adding at least a little bit of conflict to their stuff?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't like. I try and do no harm at the very least. Like I give them feedback and let them know what I'm seeing. I'm just speaking to the fact that it just seems like a trend to some extent, where it's like, it's a lot of this meets that in an irreverent fantasy. Irreverent. Where I'm like, what do you mean by that? Like, where they're trying to describe it, and it's a kind of, I don't know, it's just what's in the air and the water for them, probably just like coming out of COVID and doing some part of like high school, like online, where it's like the maximum utility of like any of this content for them is just purely escapism from the fact that like everything is fucking terrible. But yeah, I mean, like I try and meet people where they're at, where it's like I have like a handful of like really talented students who are, you know, I'm trying to like just broaden their horizons as far as like showing them like good books and movies and stuff, and not like necessarily taking ownership or, you know, or like trying to steer them in whatever way I think is right, and just being like, you need to make your own choices and like figure out what you need to do, because like you're an adult theoretically. And then the rest of them, it's like, okay, well, you just like clearly are having trouble in all of your classes and you are not able to like function at an adult level because you just like don't know how to do your laundry and eat and go to bed on time. So like, you know, we need to just make quick choices about what we're going to do for our assignments and not like sit there and sigh and groan for 45 minutes because I've asked you to like come up with an idea. So it becomes a little bit more like kids' gloves as far as just being like, okay, like I'm reminding you this is when this is due. So
if the assignment is like basically like, hey, make a comic with a story, and that's something that elicits sighs and groans for people, you have to wonder ultimately why they're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, they have less of an idea sometimes they have more, but it's like I don't want to be too judgmental, considering, you know, I came in not really having things figured out. I had more of my like my adult life figured out. Like I knew how to pay rent and like have a job, which a lot of them don't do. So like that is great, and that gives you the stability to then like do things that are, you know, like creatively challenging. So I don't know.
You touched on something interesting there. It hadn't occurred to me, but once you said it, it's very obvious in hindsight that these students that you have, I mean, obviously like all of us kind of effectively lost like, you know, 2 or 3 years of our lives, but they did it at like what was supposed to be like peak socialization time. So, I mean, that must have really got them out of whack. And maybe because of that, maybe it's not surprising that like the story of two people being friends is in fact a compelling story to them.
Right. Well, and also, like, there's just nowhere for them to really go. Like, none of them have driver's licenses, and there's not, like, a mall for them anymore. There's no, like, free areas to hang out, so they just are on their phones all the time. So, like, that wasn't going to be any different, but...
I've never actually been to Columbus, but I always assumed there was a little bit going on over there.
I'm teaching them in person. I'm only teaching, like, every now and then. Like, right now I'm not teaching. I'm doing, like, a book tour and stuff, but... when I am teaching, I'm in person. When
you said that they weren't able to go out and do anything, you meant specifically during the pandemic?
Well, I mean, like, just kids don't do anything anymore. Like, I mean, like, you might have some that, like, play sports or something, or, like, I don't know, do some sort of academic shit, but, like, kids don't go to a mall. There aren't malls anymore that they go to. They don't, like, they get yelled at for, like, being in any public space because they're just, like, sitting around. They play, like, video games, and they, like, don't do anything.
I feel like loitering was a very formative teenage experience for me.
Yeah, and no one does it anymore. Like, unless, like, you're a smoker or something, which there's not a lot of those.
Well, there's a lot of vapors, right?
Right, but you can do that inside.
What attracted you to Columbus?
The Billy Ireland Cartoon Museum is here. Like, I'd already made a lot of inroads with people that had lived here for a while. Like, the comics department at the school was pretty new. But it's just that much cheaper. The show here, Cartoon Crossroads, is, like, blowing up to some extent. It's closer to the East Coast, where it's, 5-6 hour drive to get to Philadelphia or whatever, and New York and Toronto, all these other places. Minnesota is just, like, really far from everything.
As far as the stories that you tell, I mean, it sounds like pretty much from the get-go, or at least pretty much from the 24-hour comic, that you weren't afraid to be deeply personal on the page.
Yeah, with what I'm comfortable talking about, sure.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's fair, but these are personal things, and these aren't things that, like, everybody feels comfortable putting out into the world.
Yeah. I don't know. I was in my 20s, so I don't really think about it as much as maybe I should have.
Just in order to really sort of tell your story, these are the kinds of things that you have to tell. They're like they're a big piece of that.
I mean, in the book I talk about the kind of, I don't know, I want to, like, say, like, sex work in quotes or whatever, being that, like, I did, like, sugar baby shit, and there's a MMA fighter in there that, like, I fucked around with, who is sort of like this non-relationship that I'm exploring as far as, like, kind of, like, broadening his character out. And a bunch of family trauma and shit, as far as just, I don't know, generations of people who have had a hard go of it, and then, like, having a dad who molests you as a child. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of that.
Why sex work in quotes?
Because it's confusing to say that, because no one knows what you mean when you say that. Like, people think I did OnlyFans, or, sell feet pictures, or were an escort. Like, it's such a broad term. And I don't know, like, there's plenty of people that, like, don't feel comfortable using that term, and there's plenty of people that do and are, like, insistent that you use it as opposed to anything else. And I don't know, I'm just serving myself and saying that, like, like, I did what is traditionally called being a sugar baby, which is still confusing for plenty of people who, like, don't really know the difference between that and, like, a prostitute. And so, and now that I'm, like, I'm fucking retired, I'm not doing it anymore. So it's sort of like, I don't keep up with whatever the lingo is, like, as of this year. So it's just kind of like, I'm not trying to claim anything that I'm not here or confuse people.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, like, overall, how was that experience for you?
It was fine. I mean, like I said, like, I retired from it. it's not something that I'd love my own children to do, but it's the kind of thing where everyone has an opinion about it, and like I'm not, again, like trying to claim I'm anything for the purposes of like saying this book is about that. Like I think ultimately like this book is about like being the age I was and just having like a myriad of different things that I'm juggling all at once, where it's like this is like how this kind of person like walks through life and like has to walk through life sometimes, and how frustrating that can be. But like ultimately it's not like woe is me to the extent of like a bunch of like 100 pages of me crying about how difficult X and Y is. It's more so about like the verbs of life and like doing things and like making choices. In
reading this, it sounds like there are certain instances of you kind of getting pushback as far as the kinds of comics you wanted to make. I mean, there was a professor who said something like, what is it, like, don't expect to get by on this broke girl shit, which, like, did you find that there were a lot of people that you respected in that world, or at least that you interacted with within that world, that tried to push you in a different direction?
I don't know. I think you're getting, like, critique on all sides being in art school, and I think that, like, I ultimately really did value that advice, because it was kind of like, you don't want to be a circus clown who is constantly like, look at me, everybody, like, look how funny this is, and be really self-deprecating about everything, because it just doesn't really age well, and there are like things that you're going to regret about it that may or may not be like what everyone will think you'll regret, but it's just like, there's no benefit of being like, LOL, I suck over and over again. It doesn't make self-esteem happen or stay. So, yeah, I mean, there was people telling me that, and then there's people telling me not to even make comics. So it was kind of like, there was plenty of like advice to sort through to be like, what is actually beneficial here?
I was surprised to see that bit about Frank, where he seemed like he was kind of, I don't know, being fairly pessimistic about it.
I don't know. I mean, I think he said that to like quite a few people, basically. So it wasn't really about me, no.
The pushback from the professor was less about broadly the subject matter you were covering and more about how you were covering it?
Yeah, and also just like, don't be a fucking loser. Like, I don't know. Like, that's kind of how I took it, where it's just like,
I mean, that's good advice.
Yeah,
life,
like,
right?
I mean, don't seek out situations that you think will be funny to make comics about that are to your detriment, I think is ultimately like what that kind of felt like for me.
That's a really fair point, and I've talked to a lot of people who I think fall into that trap. Was that something that you were actually doing at any point?
No, but I also think that, like, to the outside perspective, like, I don't know, like, I would leave class to, like, sell weed, like, all the time, and, like, it was pretty obvious to, like, most people that were watching me, and if anyone called me out on it, I'd be like, I need fucking money, like, what the fuck are you gonna tell me? Like, I was super bullheaded and, like, stubborn about it, and, like, I don't know, like, I got plenty of people that were making assumptions about me, being like, oh, you're in art school, so you must have money, and you're just, like, doing this for clout. I'm like, I have no money. Like, I don't know what the fuck you think I am. Like, I mean, I'm doing a lot of these things because, like, I'm not thinking about my well-being. Like, I'm not considering the fact that, like, what I'm doing, you know, with a stranger or whatever could be to my detriment. Like, I'm just saying, like, it's going to be fine. And there was times it was, and there was times it wasn't. Like, it's something that I don't hate myself for, and I don't necessarily regret, because, like, these are, like, the choices I was making at the time, being, like, the person I was. Like, I have empathy for those kinds of people, but, like, it's the kind of thing where it's, like, you know, I want to tell stories about being this age and this time, and some other people will be of a similar mind, and I'm not scolding them. I'm just saying what's happening.
So you found that people generally were fairly judgmental when it came to this stuff?
No, I think just like in art school, like where, you know, you're all like 18 to 22 years old or something, and you just have like a bunch of poorly adjusted people all trying to get graded, you know, and yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily get that now at all. Certainly not from like people I actually care about or listen to. So
I think these are things that, you know, even if you haven't experienced them personally, are highly relatable to a lot of people, especially these days, you know, in terms of like having to do what you can in order to survive.
Yeah, and like there's like people who will say like, you know, oh, well, you know, there's easier ways to make money than this or that, and maybe so, but this is like how I ended up playing my hand. The
personal training, that's your main gig at this point?
Well, comics are my main gig right now. It will be back in like January, but yeah, I'm going to Seattle tomorrow. I have been traveling since early September, and yeah, I mean, I'm doing a lot of like talking to colleges and selling books at shows and selling art and stuff. So
it's less like the actual comics, and it's more about sort of the things around the comics.
Yeah, just like the things that I try and do coordinated with the release of a book. So it's like, okay, I'm going to go make another book for like 4 years. Like, goodbye, everyone.
Is that how long it took to make this one?
Not quite that long. I wrote it like 2020, started making it like at the end of 2020. And then I finished it this year in January, so.
That seems like a good time to really, if you're focused, to sit down and start working on this, because, you know, like you said earlier, there just wasn't a ton going on then.
Yeah, and I made a bunch of like other small press like mini comics and stuff too, so it definitely was nice to just rip through a bunch of stuff.
So you found that you were productive during that period?
Yeah. I don't know, I was remarking the other day, because like I never stopped like dyeing my hair and shaving my legs and like working out and like making work. Like this has been being on tour like for like 2 months now has been like the longest I've not been working on anything or like drawing since I graduated from college. And it's good. It's fine. I don't feel like anxious about it or anything, but it's like, kind of just being like, yeah, no, I feel like all the things I do are pretty much like for myself. As far as like making sure my hair is pretty brushed.
It sounds like working out is something that you genuinely enjoy, and that is a big piece of your identity.
Yeah. It just certainly helps keep me like, well, keep all my ducks in a row, I'd say.
Just in terms of what, like just being focused on things?
Yeah, I think that like the time I spend between sets, just like planning out my day, and like I'll send emails from the gym on my phone, just being like, okay, I should do this, I should do that. And like, yeah, like slowing down, thinking about things, like moving my body, breathing, and like, it's helpful to do something like that.
Is the process of actually weightlifting, is it a meditative one at all?
I don't know, like I'm focused, so I guess so, but like I'm not a person who really meditates, so I don't know if I can use that word or something, but...
You're not really able to be productive as far as drawing or writing on the road?
I am so busy. I'm so busy. I cannot. It's not worth, like... I have work on giant pages, like comically huge boards, and I have to like light table all of the things all of the time. It's not feasible Like, I had brought plenty of stuff to work on, and I've not been able to open it, because I'm like, I have to go work out and, like, clean my clothes and do all the things I have to do regularly, but, like, I have to essentially, like, live out of my car, so, yeah.
Do you have a good sense of what's next?
Yeah, I'll have, like, a whole other book in, like, 5 years or something. That'll be, like, the follow-up to this.